A quirky and cool 80s film that is very quirky and cool, with cool and quirky characters doing quirky and cool things, saying cool and quirky things, and generally just being, what are the words I'm looking for?
Don't be mean.
Anyway, an 80s movie that feels like it's a faithful adaptation of an indie graphic novel, except it was always a movie. The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai across the 8th dimension.
No matter where you go, there you are.
Sometimes you watch a movie and it's easy to review. Sometimes you watch a movie and it's harder to review. Every now and then a likeable movie comes along, but writing the review feels like hammering nails into your hands and feet because A, it hurts, and B, somehow getting the last nail in before you pass out is just impossible. I don't want to hate on such a weird and cool film made with a lot of love, but this seems to be a film of two halves. The first half is likeable and full of invention, and the other half is just like that asshole at work Daniel, who keeps trying to heat up tins of fermented herring in the break room microwave.
Laugh a while you can, monkey boy!
Buckaroo Banzai is either a film that you get, in which case, huzzah! Or you don't get, in which case, sure, whatever, I didn't like this film anyway. Buckaroo Banzai is a guy who's a surgeon, but also wants to drive a car so fast that he can literally drive through a mountain. And he also plays in a band. Of course, why not? Yes, everyone is really cool. Buckaroo Banzai hangs out with his crew, the Hong Kong Cavaliers, quirking up the joint. During one of their gigs, Buckaroo realises something's up.
Is someone out there not having a good time?
Why would someone be sad at one of his gigs before he started playing? Penny Pretty looks remarkably like Buckaroo's late wife Peggy and is apparently her twin sister, but for some reason the two never met each other.
You had an identical twin sister, and I married her, and she's gone, and that's about all there is really to say about that.
Buckaroo's latest run in his jet car manages to cross an interdimensional threshold as he travels through a mountain, and this has caught the attention of some aliens. Aliens exiled from Planet 10 to the 8th dimension, the Red Electroids, want to find a way home. They're led by one of their number who's partly merged with human scientist Dr Lizardo, played by John Lithgow, who's totally not at all overacting. Well, maybe just a tad.
Doomed is your soul, and damned is your life.
The film's MacGuffin, the oscillation overthruster, helps Buckaroo cross the dimensional barrier, while one of these things will also help the Red Electroids cause havoc. Travelling through solid objects is a cool and useful idea. I mean, you could use it to avoid getting out of the car to open up a gate, or skip paying for parking, or use it to avoid traffic on the freeway, just by driving through it in a different dimension. Pro tip, that last excuse doesn't actually work in traffic court. The Black Electroids give Buckaroo the power to see the Electroids for their real selves.
Evil! Pure and simple from the 8th dimension! Grab him!
Anywho, the Black Electroids threaten to destroy the Earth until the Red Electroids are defeated by Buckaroo Banzai. And, well, by this stage, the cool, quirky stuff has worn you down to a not-so-cool and quirky nub, and it becomes just a little bit of a mess towards the end.
Damn John Warford and the horse he rode in on!
While Buckaroo and crew save the world, but it's mostly Buckaroo. There's a lot of running around, chasing each other, shooting at each other. At one point, Orson Welles' 1938 broadcast of War of the Worlds is woven into the story.
Maybe it wasn't a hoax, or maybe it isn't a hoax.
The Electroids have a facility, Yo-Yo-Dyne Propulsion, which is as good a place as any to stage some half-decent action sequences. The quirky part of the film gives up and goes gung-ho with shootouts all over the place. Buckaroo gets into a ship with Black Electroid John Parker, and the pair try to end the Red Electroid menace. They watch as Dr Lizardo's homebrew overthruster falls down when he tries to use it. Buckaroo parachutes back to Earth, but finds Penny's dead and somehow zaps her back to life. That's a general synopsis of what happened, but what actually happened? Honestly, I think at one point I just zoned out. So while you may be sitting there thinking about how whiny this video is,
it's really whiny.
Let's articulate our feelings for the film with a word cloud of the different thoughts and emotions we felt while watching the first half of Buckaroo Banzai. The larger the word, the stronger the feeling. And this is a word cloud from later on in the film.
Still whiny.
Where are we going? Planet 10! When? Real soon!
The first half of the film is so fun and breezy, giving us scenes of Banzai and the Hong Kong Cavaliers being cool and hip.
Just be cool.
Then watching actors like John Lithgow and Christopher Lloyd doing some excellent goofy acting as Lectoids.
Big booty. More power to him.
A lot of this film initially comes off as energetic improv, throwing outrageous ideas and quirky concepts at you with velocity. The second half of the film is where it becomes just a bit much.
Will everybody please shut up so I can hear the rest of this thing?
Especially as all of the loose threads have to be tied up to wrap up the story. Resolving everything is something the film does not do all that well. Maybe I'm just too square to dig this, man. Look how cool they are. Look at Jeff Goldblum's costume. Look at all the aliens called John, man. The film has timing like a comedy, but it's usually played straight. The first half of the film makes you smile a lot because it's quite charming, but later on you might not be smiling as much. It's almost as if Buckaroo Banzai would have worked better with a far looser plot and just showed us Buckaroo Banzai and co. doing cool stuff, almost like a sci-fi Wes Anderson movie. It's the plot that kills this. You're watching because the cast are so damn cool doing stuff that is supposed to be super cool. Cooler than you and your square friends, man.
Some giant explosion, and they hypnotized Orson Welles into covering it up. So first he says there's an invasion from Mars, but then he says, no, it's just a radio show hoax. Get it?
No, let's go.
Peter Weller is pretty good as Buckaroo, mostly deadpanning his way through the absurdity. It's all real to him, so it's real to us. Ellen Barkin starts off as a character in pain, finds some people she's in sync with, and then spends the second half of the film in various forms of bondage. Jeff Goldblum is only really 40% Goldblum at this point, as he had not yet graduated with his degree as a Master of Goldblum. He manages to speak and complete sentences without unusual pauses and not stutter all that much. He's still clearly a student working towards mastery of the dark art of Goldblum.
I don't know, wait a minute. November 1, October, 30 days have September, April, June, November, when short February is done, all the rest have 31, October 31st.
John Lithgow is pure ham, and in a good way, a ham bacon pulled pork sandwich topped with prosciutto. Dr Lizardo is a human who had an early encounter with the 8th dimension and became entwined with electroid Lord John Warfin, which just sounds about as good an excuse as any for Lithgow to just go completely wild. The electroids, red or black, all have human names John something. Carl Lumley as John Parker, Rosalind Cash as John Emdell. Christopher Lloyd is one of Lizardo's hench electroids, John Big Booty.
Shut up, John Big Booty, you coward! You're the weakest individual I ever know!
A few other familiar faces like Clancy Brown and Ronald Lacey appear throughout the film, but a good cast doesn't really do much good when the script remembers that it wants to resolve the plot sometime before the 2-hour mark. It's like throwing 50 balls into the air and expecting a juggler to catch them all. It is an interesting challenge, if only for all the fail videos.
Well, I'm probably just stating the very obvious. Shut up.
It's a clean-looking film with nice cinematography and some good production design and effects for the most part. An early to mid-80s style synthesizer score is the cherry on top. All that quirky cool didn't cost all that much for what you see on screen. Buckaroo Banzai was modestly budgeted at around $12 million and still manages to deliver a sense of scale. Yes, Buckaroo and his mates hang out in what looks like a boarding house, but in general the film manages to look better than the small budget would suggest. Director WD Richter was mostly known as a screenwriter. He'd known Buckaroo Banzai creator Mac Rauch and encouraged his work. In the early 80s, introductions were made to Hollywood producers and Rauch began work on a script about Buckaroo Bandy, as he was known for a time. Even though the idea of a Buckaroo Banzai movie would take a few years to develop, the deal to make the film would happen fairly quickly. It would still be a few years until cameras rolled on the film, which would eventually be made for 20th Century Fox.
You drove through a mountain.
I did.
You drove right through a mountain the other day. You did it right after you left me with the operation. You hadn't even said anything about it.
Production began with the usual studio notes, leading to a difficult relationship between the filmmakers and the money men. Plot threads intended to be picked up in a subsequent movie were excised, and as principal photography continued, notes from the studio reduced to a trickle, so the filmmakers added a scene about a watermelon as a test to see whether they were still being watched.
Why is there a watermelon there?
I'll tell you later.
Of course, one of the film's most remembered sequences was also a studio note, the music video-inspired sequence over the end credits where the cast meet up and coolly walk along, like you're rounding up victims of a cool person cull. How I managed to survive for all these years, I'll never know. During development, Rauch would start a script and lose interest at some point before starting again. To say that this shows in the final film is an understatement, like saying most Australians travelling overseas are lousy tippers.
Struth, I don't believe in tipping.
The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai was released in cinemas in the summer of 1984, where it proceeded to take in half of its budget. Even though a sequel was teased, this would end up being a one and done as far as feature films. Through television and home video, the film has developed a cult-like appreciation. By cult-like, I mean small and loyal, not ready to drink poison at the whim of their glorious leader. Ooh, that tea tastes a bit bitter. There aren't too many English language films like Buckaroo Banzai, at least in this era. The closest I could come to in terms of a similar tongue-in-cheek tone would be the mid-70s adaptation of Doc Savage Man of Bronze, which was likewise also not a successful film at the time.
It flies like a truck. Good. What is a truck?
Ultimately, where this film falls down is trying to marry the quirky and cool with a script that loses its way later on, like a hiker who's been lost for 3 days until they realise they were holding the map upside down. Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai is neither a good or a bad film, but it's also not an average film. The real tragedy for me is that I desperately want to like this movie. Buckaroo Banzai is a likeable concoction for the most part. It just doesn't resolve into a particularly great movie. Sure, it's a fun time, and that is probably the point. Buckaroo Banzai is a film that is less than the sum total of its parts. So it's either exhilarating or confusing, or really a bit of both. It's interesting in so many ways, yet even if you like weird stuff, can leave you feeling really unsatisfied. You may love the film or you may hate the film, but either way, do you really understand the film? Or do you just let it carry you away and hope the current carries you away from the piranhas?
It's Buckaroo Banzai!
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
She's a killer.
No, she's not. And give her your coat.
Why me?
Because you're perfect.
You have a point there.